know, it's pretty exciting. I think Lisa's gonna go over protocol with our lovely mic system, and this is new to Lisa and to Ian and to me. And it's new to you too.
That's right. So we have new microphones. In the old days, the microphones were always on. And so if you didn't want someone to hear you, you hit the button, but now they're always off. So if you want to speak, you push the button, you can see it turns green, but only 3 microphones can be on at a time. So like, for example, on roll call, don't all turn on your mic because then, you know, it won't work for some people. Wait till they get to you, or wait till the president calls on you. If Jane wants to speak her mic, she can turn it on at any time and it won't turn you guys off. And the same for the public, so the staff will, when we have people testifying, be in charge of kind of turning their mics on for them and making sure they get turned off, because that's part of the 3. We do have a camera here in the middle, right in front of Shelby. You can see that little camera that shows basically the whole room. So that's what's going to be on YouTube. And then there's a camera at the podium for the speaker that will be on YouTube as well. But it won't be the cameras you see mounted in the room for our meetings, because we don't have CC media running or cameras. So they're not going to be like close-ups with your name, you know, while you're talking. It's just going to be the room. We did bring water, so if there's water, if you want that, there's also a water filler station around the corner. Bathrooms are around the corner as well. Anytime you are going to recuse yourself from a hearing and not participate for ex parte conflict, you need to actually get up out of your seat and go sit, you know, declare it, and then, so like on Zoom, you turn your camera. So that's the equivalent. Go sit in the back somewhere. And I think that's all the Shelby anything else. Okay, there you go.
There you go, Shelby, would you please call the order, the roll call, please? Oh, no, actually, we need to do the election of officers first. So we need a motion, 2 motions, 1 for president and 1 for vice president. Right, your motion.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead, and I'm happy to nominate Shane Briggs for president.
And I need a second. Second. Thank you. Commissioner Heller is our second. Discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion? Signify by saying aye. And nay if you oppose. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed? Thanks, guys. Now I need a motion for vice president. Motion for vice president.
Commissioner Levine.
Okay. I have a motion for Commissioner Grant to be vice president. I need a second.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Augustine, Commissioner Augustine. Discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes, both passed. And now, Shelby, we're ready for a roll call.
Commissioner Augustine,
Here.
Commissioner Ikes,
Here.
Commissioner Fott is absent, Commissioner Goebel,
Here.
Commissioner Griggs,
Here.
Commissioner Heller,
Here.
Commissioner Levin,
Here.
Commissioner Slater,
Here.
and Commissioner Viera Brindle.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum. Moving on to the consent calendar, item 4.1, approval of the minutes for November 15th. Commissioner Ikes, do you have a motion?
I move approval of the minutes for November 15th.
Second.
Second by Levin.
Thank you. Second by the discussion on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. You're in favor. All those opposed? Motion passes. Public hearing, moving to item 5.1, which is a continued hearing on case CA 22-4. Laura, I think you probably would want to bring us up to speed on that. Before I do that, are there any conflicts or potential?
Commissioner Briggs, your microphone's on.
That is Zoom. Thank you, Robert. Potential or actual conflicts of interest. And before, were you recording on the minutes? Did you get a chance to check that? I'm back setting.
I did not have a chance.
Okay, so the vote should just show Commissioner
I'm going to
Augustine.
abstain.
Yeah, abstain. Yeah. Okay, Laura, we're ready.
Thank you, Commissioners. Laurel Christian with the Public Works Department to discuss continuing hearing for CA 22-04 for proposed amendments to SRC chapters 77, 78, 200. For the 15th hearing, I presented package of amendments to the commission, and there were some additional questions related to the sections for fee in lieu of construction improvements in chapter 200. We have two supplemental memos in your packet this evening that discuss some background information on the fee in lieu program, and then a response to Commissioner Goebel's questions that I received. And then there is an additional supplemental memo that talks about some examples from other communities doing their program. Just a bit of a recap. At the hearing, we have proposed, the staff proposal was to amend fee in lieu to allow funds be pooled into one pot of money rather than the way that we are doing fee in lieu now, which is that the fee in lieu has to be collected and spent on the specific improvement for which it's collected for. In the second supplemental memo, there are some numbers which might be helpful to discuss. The current balance, essentially we collect fee in lieu funds and we place them in a trust fund. And so I was able to track down the current balance of the trust. I wasn't able to go back and look at past transactions. That's a little bit harder to track. But currently we have $3.3 million or so in trust fund that we've collected over time. Some of those monies range back all the way from 2007 in very small amounts. Around a third of that is less than $10,000 contributions to the fund. And then a significant portion of that contribution is fee in lieu for Cooper Boulevard that was collected as part of the Mill Creek corporate, that has been collected so far as part of the Mill Creek Corporate Center development. I think a little bit of background on the program. We initially started collecting fee in lieu instead of requiring boundary street improvements for projects that have either a larger public improvement that's needed because there's a deficiency, but there's a smaller improvement that currently exists to serve the development so that it wouldn't kind of stall out smaller developments. Or in the case of Mill Creek Corporate Center, which is a good example, it's a very large development and Kugler Boulevard is a very large improvement. So collecting small fee in lieu over time would allow the city to go and install a corridor improvement all at once. So there are a few examples in the memo as to cases that have come up in the past. And then in terms of our current program, like I mentioned, we have to spend the funds in the exact location for which they were collected, and that's become difficult. And I found that with tracking the funds, there are a lot that just have not gotten spent, and so that's why staff had recommended we are able to pool the funds and use them for CIP projects. The recommendation, which is listed in this memo briefly, is that those revenues essentially become another form of CIP funding, which the CIP and capital improvement program is reviewed and approved by council every year. They prioritize projects based on a number of qualifying criteria, and so essentially it would become another revenue source for that. I looked at some other communities. There's not really a clear, consistent path that anyone takes for these. Everyone kind of does it all over. Some communities do it the way we do it. Some communities do it by neighborhood or in specific areas that are assigned. And some communities do it area-wide. So it's kind of up to the commission and the council as to how they'd like to proceed on that. I'm going to prepare a formal presentation, but I can take any questions on the supplemental memos that we have for you.
Thank you, Laurel. Questions for Laurel? Commissioner Egas.
Just a couple of questions, or maybe one overriding question. I guess the second supplemental, when you go through the staff response to questions. I guess the question is, the examples or the practice would be to establish it based on the cost for the current year. So I'm wondering, since construction may actually, any construction may actually happen years out, are we taking into account inflation based on by simply the fund collecting interest? Is that how we take into account inflation?
Thank you. So currently, there's two paths One is the current path that we do, which is the cost, the fee in lieu is equal to the engineer's estimate that's developed for the cost of the improvement for the year that it would be constructed. So that does not take into account inflation. We essentially collect a one-time fee, and then that's the end of it. There's a very small amount of interest that the trust accrues each year, but it definitely does not keep up with inflation. And so the other part of this amendment is that would like to add some code language that caps the fee and lieu amount at the current transfer station system development charge that the development would accrue. And those are adjusted annually or every few years for inflation and adopted by city council. So currently, the way we do it, that's not built in, but the idea is that if we move forward to having the cap based on TSDCs, that would be.
You had a second question, I believe. Robert, did you want to weigh in?
I was just gonna add, briefly, the Commissioner's question, actually, is along the reason why we are proposing this change in how we manage our system development charge, piece of Luba. Because $10,000 paid for 15 years ago is not worth $10,000 today. It's going to look 7%. So that's, thank you for that question.
Yeah, another question.
You bet.
Excuse me. I guess it's page 3. You say that the staff is proposing adopting a accompanying administrative rule that recommends establishing an average construction cost per foot of improvement to be included in the annual fee resolution. I'm wondering how often you expect that would be revised?
I'm not sure that we thought about that. However, those fees, we do look at the fee table every year. So we could review it annually, or we could review it based on, our construction rates annually. We hadn't really considered that.
Well, I realize I don't think we do anything with administrative rules, but it seemed just from reading this, if it's based on an average construction cost, that's going to change from year to year, if not, over several period of years because of inflation and other things. So
Sounds like the fee structure table would be looked at annually along with other fees.
That's correct. And I also believe there's language in the administrative rule that says that it's reviewed annually to account for that.
Commissioner Slater, you had a question?
Thank you. So I just had a follow-up to Mr. Chandler's comments. So if I understand correctly, the fee in this proposal would be based on a table that's set by the city council, and takes into account inflation. Is that correct? I didn't quite follow the mechanisms.
I think there are two factors here. One is that the fee can be based on the engineer's estimate for the improvement. The thought behind having a table is there are a lot of smaller projects that would qualify or rightfully should be given an opportunity to pay a fee in lieu. They don't have an engineer assigned to it, so we give them a linear, simple method should they choose to do that. The charge per linear foot, or however I think that's how we're going to end up with it, would go into the annual fee schedule that is adopted by council.
And that does or does not take into account inflation.
Every year we would say, well, inflation's done this, we go with.
So it's not prospective inflation, you're not anticipating.
What we have been doing in adjusting the fees every year is certain fees are based on the engineering news record tables of how construction costs. And so we'll take the fees from, for example, fiscal year 22-23, adjust those based on what we think what has happened in the past, move them up. So it's like a year lag time in there. But that's what we're basically.
I guess my concern was I would want someone to pay what it will cost 10 years in the future.
No.
Oh, okay.
The fee is assessed at the time that they're approved for a fee.
Very helpful, thanks.
Had a related question, and I'll get to Commissioner Goble on that administrative rule that will be written to include the cost per linear foot discussion. At least that sounds like it's part of the administrative rule, right? Could we get people from the construction industry in part of that conversation? Because I think you'll have better buy-in when you're writing a rule that's going to affect them if you have somebody at the table that's representing that industry.
The answer is yes.
Perfect. Commissioner Goble.
I can cut you off before you say anything.
First, I just want to say a huge thank you to Laurel for really providing such a thorough and well-researched response to my questions. Like, this is huge and really answered a lot of my preliminary hesitancy about this. I'm really excited about the potential of being able to apply these payments to, actually get things done and move projects forward. I think this has a lot of potential, and I think it is really innovative. And so I just really want to just express I'm really impressed and grateful for the work you put into responding to that. I do have a few kind of things that came up, like as going through your responses and did some looking into the CIP and trying to wrap my head around what this would look like in practice. And so the first one I kind of wanted to address, you mentioned transportation SDCs, and one of your examples in the supplemental staff report did a breakdown based on transportation SDCs, but there is under B in one of the sections, the section that addresses fee and lieu amounts. It says fee and lieu amounts except for mitigation measures associated with the traffic impact of transportation planning rule analysis shall be limited by the following proportionality constraints. And that's the section where it goes into those SDC limits for what I would assume would be like SDCs other than transportation SDCs. So can you explain the implications of that and why basically transportation projects are exempted from that SDC cap?
So my understanding is that when a project comes, so site plan review application or subdivision application comes in, they submit a traffic impact analysis that's looking at neighboring intersections and corridors and how that development specifically impacts those things. And we're exempting TIA mitigation that's required. So an engineer and traffic engineer looks at the proposal, they recommend mitigation that would be needed to ensure that the streets are adequately operating. And so the reason TIA mitigation is removed from that is that we need the TIA mitigation to allow the development to proceed and to ensure that the streets are adequately operating at capacity. So those TIA mitigation is generally above and beyond typical boundary street improvements that we would see fee would be used for.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so I think my second question is the criteria for determining when a fee and lieu will be allowed. And I think that the way that it's written is really broad, right? It's not like a clear and objective series of criteria for determining when a fee and lieu is allowed. And I think that in the past that hasn't really been such a huge issue because typically those fee and lieus are basically what you be paying anyways to construct the mitigation. So it's like whatever the director or public works, thinks is applicable, that's pretty in line with what is being proposed. Like I don't think there's been, as far as I know, a ton of conflict over whether or not that fee and lieu should be allowed. But with these SDC caps, I think my concern is, well, I have two concerns, I guess. The first is that I think this might open the door to more developers and more projects being really pushing for this, right? Whereas like they might have like a $50,000 street frontage improvement due to specific site constraints, but because that's not proportionate in terms of the SDC cap, you might have more people saying like, well, that's actually significantly less than what I would be paying otherwise. And so I feel like this maybe will make it more difficult for staff to, or you guys might maybe see more developers pushing back or really like advocating for, let me do the fee and lieu. So that's my one concern. I don't know if you guys have thought that through or kind of addressed that, how that might look in practice, I guess.
We can vet the criteria a bit more to make sure it's more clear and objective as to when it's allowed. And in the draft administrative rule, we also have some additional criteria for when staff should be using fee and lieu that helps. That's not necessarily in the code language, but that is in how we would apply it based on the administrative rule.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to see a draft that's presented to council that's more specific and more objective in terms of when do and don't apply these. Because I mean, I think the idea here is really clear that there's, we only want to see these applied when it's clearly something that you don't want to just put a sidewalk in the middle of a quarter mile of no sidewalks or, a 12-inch sewer line connecting the two 8-inch sewer lines for 400 feet, right? I think it makes sense and I understand the applicability, but I just think that it would be I think it might be pertinent to have that more fleshed out now that this is probably gonna be a more, I don't know, desirable thing for some developments.
Then I will just add, that, part of the, issue of payment of fee in lieu is that it's not a right of the developer. It's always a choice, by the director and what is the best option there, because a lot of developers find value in pay and forget, we take care of it. But in some cases, it's not, even if the project might qualify for those things, you still might not say no because it's a discretionary opportunity.
Right. And this might be a bit of a leap, but given that it's not been objective, there might be like pushback with housing developments. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Lisa, but something potentially. I think this is like, you know, just an opportunity for it to be more fleshed out.
Did you have another question before I move to Commissioner Slater?
I do have other questions, but I think maybe that's fine to bounce back and forth.
Okay, we'll come back to you if your questions aren't asked and answered. Commissioner Slater?
Thank you. I'm trying to understand this in the context of something that I can understand in my own neighborhood. And when Commissioner Goble talked about the criteria, that made me think a little bit more about this. So what I'd be interested in understanding is under what context a developer, or I'm just going to call it an applicant can choose, or when the city would use fee in lieu of. And I'll give you an example that Ms. Warren Keefe knows quite well, which is my hobby horse of Rubitz Road, which is an important in my neighborhood connector street that doesn't have a lot of sidewalks. And I've been told if I never will have any sidewalks because it falls exactly between the priorities for the bond and what the state or the federal government will fund. So my question, I guess, is that if people are not doing it incrementally on a street like Rubitz, where it would be kind of an island, okay, we've got 6 houses and one does it, that may be the best we're gonna get for a long time. Or the second point could be, if 2 or 3 people wind up doing that, all of a sudden that it costs the city less money to fill that space in. They can say, oh, this used to be $1 million project, but because we've had all these little incremental improvements, now it's a $300,000 project and we can fund that. And I worry that this fee in lieu of can be used as a way, or has the consequence, the unintended consequence of avoiding infill improvements that could generate long-term improvements. Is that hypothetical, or does that scenario make sense?
Robert, do you want to answer that, or Laura, you guys can flip?
Okay, one tag team. Well, you illustrate that it's trade-offs, really. We collect fees in lieu now. And we've got record that fees in lieu have not been used because there's no value in a $10,000 whatever. There's no value. And on the other hand, they'll sit in the pot for a very long time. We also have examples where we put little gaps, the sidewalks in, and the gaps are still there some years later. So we have examples where we had more money, could have done more, we might be able to do more with this. It's a policy call. You are correct. There's aspects where one neighborhood might say, oh, we're never going to get it qualified. But if we're able to be flexible of using a payment of a fee in lieu of constructing a sidewalk in 20 different places and build it in one, there's a benefit for that, but the trade-off is the other, where the math comes out, doesn't work. So that's part of the challenge in this, it's a policy call.
So in the example of Rubitz, we could have someone improving their lot on Rubitz, make a fee in lieu of developing their portion of the sidewalk on that street. And then that money in this proposal, would instead of being used on Rubitz or in the Fairway neighborhood, could be used to improve South Mill Creek or some other part of the community.
That is our recommendation to give us that flexibility. And that's a trade-off again. It's
Right.
policy.
Right. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in on the trade.
And then also too, my understanding in reading the report is the CIP is determined, those priorities are determined by council. So I would assume your counselor would be very vocal and, you know, advocating for fun. Yeah. I'm going to move to Commissioner Ekus and then Howard.
Thank you. I have 2 questions, one of which is almost might be a copy of Michael's, but Judy's pretty familiar with this. Is we have a situation on Salem Heights where they put in, they're required to put in sidewalk, particular location behind the street trees. 5 foot wide. Only sidewalk on the street. Community sponsored, the city started a process, worked with the community, and we're about to close a plan for an improvement plan where the primary alternative is a multi-use path. And so, I'm wondering how, in the Salem Heights instance, where they had to put in the sidewalk, would that be an instance where if this was in place, that the discretion and the fee in lieu would be an option?
You're talking about Red Heights.
Yeah,
You're asking whether we could have accepted a fee in lieu of them building that sidewalk?
I'm asking not if what you're proposing would have been in effect at the time.
If it had been.
Yeah.
I think we could, I mean, the option would have been there, it would have been codified. Whether we would have accepted it or not, I don't know, it's a bit abstract, if my choice, I would not.
Yeah, I just, that was my
Yeah,
question, is
yeah.
whether it would have been applied, because I understand there's complicated
That is a
issue
fascinating question.
and not a lot of.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's a similar situation where low priority in terms of improvement of transportation plan, or reason we developed an improvement plan, hopefully get it moved up and hopefully get it available, because the phrasing is to be used when there's opportunities. And
That might be a suggestion to you, Commissioner Sanders, to develop an
We'll talk after.
yeah, I mean, in fact, this was supposedly an attempt to see if we could create, if a model could be created for other streets to use. My second question sort of comes from the reference, again, this kind of grows out of my Red Heights experience, about when you say TIA, I've asked this before, I think, about what the difference between, the code reference is to when a TIA is required. But as I understand it, almost every developer puts in does some sort of traffic analysis. So when you say TIA, are you referring to that specific code provision where a TIA is required, which from my understanding is it's a more in-depth, extensive analysis, or are you using it generically as any traffic impact analysis?
So the code language is specifically intended to the traffic impact analysis that's required under, it's in 803. That requires the developer to do that larger study.
Okay.
It's not meant for any, transportation impact. It's specific mitigation that's identified in a TIA as a condition of
Okay.
approval.
Good, yeah, because I'll use Red Heights as an example, just why it came up. The determination was made that there was no TIA required. And you put in the process of discussion, the developer did a more extensive traffic analysis that was presented as part of their case as to what the development would be approved. And what you're saying is that this would not apply to that analysis.
I'm not that familiar with the analysis that was done for Red Heights.
Well, it was not considered a TIA under the code that you're talking.
The intent of this is TIA mitigation that is specifically listed as a condition of approval in a land use decision for development. So I don't know whether or not the Red Heights had that, but this would apply to.
Okay, so again, this is part of what I'm trying to get a clarification here, because there is a code provision, I can't cite it, and I think you referred to it. There are certain instances where there's a determination that the amount of traffic being added creates, so I think there's actually a threshold, and if you go that threshold, you have to do what's called TIA, that's in the code. But a lot of developers, as happened in Red Heights, we argued that you should do a TIA, but it wasn't under that provision. We argued about the one that provides for its unsafe street. We decided we were unsafe, but not unsafe enough to do analysis. But the developer did do a traffic analysis, and the traffic analysis was part of the consideration, I think, for some of the final decisions and some of the final conditions. So I'm wondering, when you use TIA, whether you were, talking about that specific code requirement, or whether you're talking about traffic analysis done by a developer that's not at that same level.
So I will weigh in, watching for nonverbal cues from my colleague on my left. So TIA, traffic impact analysis, there are fairly clear guidelines, standards of when it's required for different types of development based on, the nature of what's being built. Oftentimes the result of a traffic impact analysis or TIA is that you put a signal in this intersection, there's something else there. And as it's said in here, you would not accept a payment or fee in putting in a signal because it is a result of this traffic impact analysis and you have to build a safe development and therefore we will accept a payment or fee. And I think that's why the language is written the way it is. That's how it's set.
Right, so I interpret that then it would not apply to other traffic analysis that is done short of what is required in that particular.
I would agree with you because I don't think the code has a category right under traffic impact analysis called other kinds of traffic analysis.
No, it doesn't, but in the discussions about traffic impact analysis, raisers are told, well, there's different levels of impact analysis, and I think that's what we're talking about. Part of it is the level that's required by that particular code provision, and then there's a level that the city may want the developer to do, or the developer may decide it needs to do that in order to satisfy some objections or make people feel more comfortable. And this would only apply really to the one that's required by that particular code.
Our intentions is that this would apply, is that if example, a signal is required, is not eligible for a payment or fee of installing that signal.
Yeah.
That's it. And I think if a less rigorous is not the right word, I'll use that traffic analysis is done that shows a signal should be put in place, we would probably not accept a payment fee, but that's in way too.
Yeah, but then that's within your discretion.
Right? Yes, there's always our discretion whether or not to accept a payment.
Okay, I just wanted traffic impact analysis, yes, always.
These are good questions.
Did you have another question? Are you
No,
ready,
that's-
Brandon? Okay,
Thank you.
Commissioner Heller, and then I'm not sure, thank you.
I have a procedural question. If a fee in lieu is denied, then what redress does the developer have? Do they go to court? Do they go to the commission? Do they go to the council?
I'm looking. Oh, someone else, there's too many microphones here.
I got mine off.
It's flashing angrily at red. Deputy City Attorney Atchison, what's the remedy? Did I say Atchison? No.
He'll be
I have a favorite.
consultant.
Yeah.
As I recall, there is a way to appeal the director's decision. I think it goes. I don't know, we'll have to get back to you. I think there is something written in, but I can't recall exactly the mechanism. I want to say hearings officer. but could be wrong.
We can check, I don't think,
Yeah, we can
I think you're not certain.
Well,
Thank you. I just wanted to circle back to the TIA traffic signal conversation, because Julie was giving me some side eye. So this section that we mentioned the traffic signal specifically in the traffic impact analysis is the section that discusses proportionality and capping the fee in lieu amount at the TSGC. So this is saying that if for some reason we did accept paying a fee in lieu for a traffic signal, if that traffic signal was required as TIA mitigation, they would not be able to use the transportation system development charge cap. They would have to pay the full amount for whatever was constructed.
that makes sense. Other questions before I go back to Commissioner Goble? Commissioner Goble, you've got the floor.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so with that, I appreciate this sort of breakdown of the potential of sort of wrapping the fee in lieu funds and process into the CIP. I think that that could be interesting, but I think that there's a couple kind of concerns or questions come out of that for me. And the first is, that the CIP policy, is it correct that it exempts projects under $50,000? Like, I don't think the CIP, like, I was just looking through it kind of briefly, and I don't believe it includes projects that are valued under $50,000. So is that correct?
That is generally correct.
Okay, so that does leave a gap for projects that would be potentially eligible for fee in lieu, but that would never be included on the CIP like proposal list, in which case it doesn't really make sense to require a developer to pay a fee for an improvement that will never get built, right? And that will never be included in the prioritization process of actually like spending out that money.
Thank you. So I guess the idea is that if we get $10,000 here and $10,000 here, eventually that adds up to an amount that's potentially more than 50,000, which then could be budgeted on the CIP. If we go with a proposal that is being able to use it citywide.
Okay, so it might be worth considering adding a provision under the criteria for approving a fee in lieu or authorizing a fee in lieu, that it has to be to a project that's valued over $50,000. Otherwise, it wouldn't really make sense, right?
That's a good point. Because otherwise there's a gap, like that project that's under, that's 49,000 wouldn't be considered under CIP.
So, for smaller projects, we don't necessarily need to have council adopted in the CIP, we have it on operating projects. We could do.
Okay.
But we could certainly incorporate that threshold. Most projects we're doing are more than 50,000.
Sure. So if someone's doing a partition and they're like proportionate shares in $4,000, and it's towards a project that's minor, maybe a $40,000 project, that you could just take that from the general fund and complete that improvement by the time that it's
Some fund,
viable.
we take out some fund, sure, yes. Lots of different.
Some fund.
Yes.
We just love it when you say yes.
Yes. Yeah, so again, so going back to that prioritization process, the CIP process, I think that, I guess my question would be, what happens, sort of there's two sort of scenarios that can happen. So say I have a project located along a substandard sewer line, substandard water line, substandard street, and say there's 10 lots that are along this specific, say, half-mile corridor. They're all substandard. So each one, commits a small proportionate share towards this project. If I'm the developer that's the straw that broke the camel's back, where the city says, okay, now we cannot approve any more projects until this improvement's done, but it's not on our 5-year CIP, or maybe we just weren't anticipating that level of development in that corridor, or there had been redevelopment to capacity that wasn't anticipated. Now, you guys would say, okay, this sewer line will not handle whatever you're proposing, so this does need to get done. Is that developer on the hook for completing that entire infrastructure improvement project? Or is there, I guess, would there be a way of moving that to the top of the priority list in order, you know what I'm saying? I guess, how would that play out?
I can try. So we have a process that is separate from this conversation that allows the camel to break, this trust back or whatever. So if a development comes in and they need to build a sewer line, and they need an 8-inch main to serve it, and they need to install a 12-inch main to serve everyone else, we have a process that's completely separate from this that allows the city to reimburse the developer for a proportion of constructing that improvement, so that we're still getting the improvement and the development is not just stalling out. And so I think the idea is that potentially if those 5 other houses or businesses on that street pay their fee in lieu, we could then potentially use that money to reimburse the developer for actually going and constructing the project. I think we talk a lot about CIP project, but a lot of those projects are projects that developers are building and that the city is reimbursing them for.
Mm-hmm. So that actually brings up another question we had. Because in this case, so if these funds are being spent on other projects, so say that those 5 developers have all paid their proportionate share, and now we've spent their fee and lieu on projects in other areas of town, now that big developer comes in with an unanticipated 100-unit apartment complex, now they need to build this sewer line. I'm going with this, right?
We would be on the hook for amending the CIP or amending the 309 list to potentially asking council to approve reimbursement for that development.
Gotcha. But it wouldn't in any scenario stall development because this thing that's been slowly funding or slowly funded, either through the reimbursement district or through a separate process, we would be able to come up with these funds, right?
But maybe, so being a little more general in your scenario is that if in order for new development to occur, they needed larger sewer line. That's what the systems development charge system process is all about. They would normally have to build an 8-inch, but in fact, we need a 12-inch line, I'm making up these numbers. So the difference between building an 8-inch and 12-inch line, those costs get certified, and that project is eligible for refund on the system, for their sewer system development charge. And the system development charge, the SDC program has 5 different components: parks, water, wastewater, stormwater, and transportation. So it's a qualifying improvement, meaning it's in the capital improvement plan, and it's in the 309 list. The 309 list is a separate state required list of capital improvements fed off of master plan. Then they're eligible. They don't, but in order to receive that reimbursement, we have to have enough money in the SDC fund in order to reimburse it. And council approves the budget for those SDC reimbursements. So in your scenario, it's not likely that it's a payment of fee in lieu that reimbursement development. It's an SDC program.
Do you have a follow-up, Commissioner Gold, or an additional question?
I have an additional question. If there's a project that, and it's sort of just piggybacking on that, but so if there's a project that's fully funded through these fee and lieux, but those fee and lieux have been put in this big larger pot in many other areas, so you can look back over the last 10 years and say, okay, this is now a fully funded project, but that money is no longer set aside as it would be today as a specific project. Is that going to automatically just, like, I guess, will that project get done at that time, or will it be added just and sort of incorporated into the CIP process?
If I understand your question scenario, when you look at our capital improvement program, the we ask council to adopt. For every project, there's a set of columns on funding. And it's got, for example, it's got sewer SDC, some grant fund, or some matching fund for some other source, and it would have also utility fund sources, whatever the number for the source. This would add another line that says fee in lieu fund, and it would be just add another source of funding for the project. And when those monies from that fee in lieu pot are spent, then the pot goes down and you have to go for more money to add to a different project.
Okay. I think then, and this would be sort of my final question, I think, is tracking these. So like with SDCs, it's pretty simple to track whether an SDC is a pay raise. If you have a single family home, and you're redeveloping the apartment complex, you just know that the SDC is based on a single family SDC impact. But with this, it's totally different because every project, every location, every capital improvement project is different. So how is that going to be tracked as to what's been paid and when, and whether fees were paid at the time of initial development or redevelopment and so forth?
Well, right now, we track it position location by location. That's how we'll got the information. So this would allow us to put it into the central pot based on the line of business water, wastewater, stormwater, what have you. I don't believe we've not actually talked about this, whether we would then track that the payment of the fee in lieu of for this segment of sidewalk is now been done over here. I don't think we track it. I probably would go in common pot.
I think maybe to clarify my question, like if I'm doing a partition and I'm charged a specific impact for that partition due to the fact that it doesn't have a sidewalk in front of it, for example. And then years down the road, I decide to redevelop that parcel and that sidewalk still isn't built. Am I going to be charged again for that same sidewalk?
So presently, you have to sign a fee in lieu of agreement that gets recorded with the property. That basically says what we collected it for. And so in theory, that would be in the title report, and then you can find it. may be able to build some kind of tracking system into the administrative rule. Currently, the only tracking system that we have now is the trust fund line items. So there's a project number, an address, and then I was able to go and individually look up every single case and figure out what those improvements were, or what those improvements for. But I think part of this program moving forward, I would like to map potentially when feelings are collected and then potentially also have some kind of tracking system. But like Robert mentioned, I think ultimately we're not going to be so much dedicating money towards, specific projects anymore and just lumping the money into these lots of money for street improvements, sewer improvements, water improvements.
Will it continue to be listed on the title report though? Like if I purchase a property where they've already paid a fee in lieu for frontage improvements, will I have that sort of record in the deed or chain of title so I can say, this has already been paid when I develop it?
Yes, the agreements currently get recorded against property.
Thank you, that's helpful. That's all for now, thank you.
Okay, other questions of staff at this point? Okay, then if there are no other questions, I'm going to close the hearing. Hearing's closed. So, Commissioner Levin, do we have a motion?
I will make a motion for approval of proposed amendments to the Salem Revised Code, updating chapter 77, 78, 200, 803. To recommendation for City Council.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Do I have a second? Commissioner Heller, thank you so much for stepping up. Discussion on the motion. Yes.
Clarification. I thought I heard you say you were going to bring additional language back.
Or bring it to City Council.
We have a proposed administrative rule that accompanies the amendments that we would take to City Council. But that wouldn't be coming back to the commission.
But I thought you said it was about the objectives and criteria. Yeah.
We can look at the language if Ms. Goble had recommended or thought about it, but if you think it needs to come back, or if not, we can look at it.
Well, that's just
Take it
my
to council.
clarification as to whether the intent is that you bring it back here or whether you bring it to the council. Because
Yeah, I think
if you're
so.
going to bring it to the council, then
My understanding was that you're going to bring it to the council with some more clarification, more structure around the criteria.
That's my recommendation, yes.
okay. So
Of
just
course,
trying
we'll be listening out to you. Does anybody want to testify? How about you? No, you're good, you're right over there? Okay.
What would you like to testify?
This, but,
Okay.
You're good?
I have nothing.
okay, we're glad you're here. You're welcome. Commissioner Slagle.
So I'm not gonna vote in favor of this. I'm just not comfortable with the idea of charging people a fee for something that they eventually are not going to get. I think it essentially becomes a tax. You're simply taxed for where you live, and that tax gets put into a general fund and used in some other part of the community. It's hard to turn money down, put money on the table, but in this case, I'm just simply not comfortable with this idea.
Thank you. Other comments? I was a little uncomfortable initially right off the bat because I felt like if there's a project in Northeast Salem, for example, there's a fee in lieu, but it wouldn't be used in their neighborhood. My only hope that I'm hanging my hat on is that those projects on the CRP are going to be a city council discussion. And that we need to make sure that our councilors and that are representing our wards are factoring in the work that needs to be done in our own wards. That's the only thing that alleviates my concern about that, because I had the same concern about that. But I'll be voting anyway. Other comments? Commissioner Goble.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Commissioner Slater's concerns were what I was initially held up on, and I think that staff's done a really good job of addressing that process and sort of procedure for I don't think in terms of viewing it as a like tax for living or for having property adjacent to substandard development is necessarily like in line with as long as it's properly tracked and that there is a record of where these funds have been paid, I think that it ends up not negatively impacting those properties in the way that I initially thought that it would. And I think that I've actually I think you could also view it as a development incentive in areas where those funds will now be used more readily to complete these projects, right? And so in an area where a project would not have otherwise been completed until every property along that substandard corridor contributes their fee in lieu, it can now sort of be prioritized or, you know, those fees can be used more readily. And I know it is a little, it's unique and it's innovative to do this in a way that's based on the city council's prioritization or other, you know, methodology for figuring out how this distribution of these funds will take place. But I think we also kind of have to see it as a development incentive in some ways for those other areas where those improvements will not be made, I guess.
Okay, other comments on the motion? Commissioner Levin, then Commissioner Egas.
I too struggled with the application of dollars outside of the development area, and I'm still questioning it and whether or not it makes better sense. Some of what I've heard today definitely helps, but I'm still questioning. I love to hear from everyone how they're leaning about their choice on vote before we vote. I think I'm gonna vote yes, because staff did reference that this has been done in other communities in different formats. And I am interested in seeing Salem take some steps to improve how and where dollars are spent, efficient and things, so that we can lower some of our STC fees. But I would vote cautiously to support with the declaration to staff that this will be watched closely, and if this isn't successful, that there's going to be support from public to change back to what it was, and that staff should be prepared to do that if this is an ultimate failure, which I think will be evident fairly quickly as soon as dollars are spent, if it's successful or not. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Other thoughts around the table? Commissioner Egas, sorry, Commissioner Egas.
So I'm just going to echo some of the initial concerns that everybody I think had. Commissioner Levin's asking where people are leaning, and I'm leaning to support it. The reason is I think the current system may actually hinder the kinds of capital improvements we want to do because it's restricted to particular area. And I think that this is my hope. The reason I would be voting for it is that I hope that the flexibility that this gives means that we will have that we can actually proceed faster to capital improvements, and that all capital improvements will end up being more of a complete process where we can proceed rather than continue to wait for piecemeal things all over.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's what sways me, is that I think it gives us more flexibility to actually improve the capital improvement process, rather than having small bits here and there and waiting for those small bits to total up enough to actually get something done in a more complete manner in an area.
Thank you, Commissioner Egas. Other thoughts? Commissioner Duvall or Commissioner Heller? I know Commissioner Augustine is not participating.
I mean, I'm kind of with everyone else, but I'm cautiously leaning towards it. I mean, my ideal enactment of this, I think, would be similar to what I was just looking at. I think Milwaukee does, where it has to be in the same neighborhood. Just because I do have some of the same concerns that, money gets taken from one place and then just funneled over at the whims of someone else to a different part of town. And the people that are paying that never actually get anything out of the fees that they're paying, but I have seen a lot of places where there is 50 feet of sidewalk and it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
So this does seem like a good way to get past that.
Thank you for your comments. Commissioner Heller, anything you want to add?
I agree that it's just more efficient. I do have concerns that it's outside the neighborhood. I think we all do have that concern, but I think it's more efficient with pooling and trusting that those who are making the choices will do so fairly and rationally.
Hopefully that when it comes in front of city council, they'll have a map, a geographic map of the area, like where are those CIP dollars going? As a form of accountability. Commissioner Slater, you have your light on.
I started in 2020, the 8-1 vote. It looks like I'm starting 2023 with an 8-1 vote, but I don't count those things. Generally, I'm the optimist, and so it's unusual for me to be a little bit pessimistic on this. I guess since we're going to be voting in favor of this, that I would really encourage the staff to develop some sort of mechanism that they can present when they present this to the city council that explains how we are going to track the allocation of funds from people who have made fee in lieu of. We have a lot of GIS technology these days, and I think it would be extremely helpful for Councilor Nordyke to know what amounts actually have to come out rather than rely on the referendum or call it or before the council meeting. So perhaps that would be my thought on how best to handle this as it gets to the city council.
Any final thoughts before I call for the vote? Shall would you please call the roll, signify by saying aye if you're in favor of the motion or nay if you're opposed.
Commissioner Akis,
Aye.
Commissioner Goble,
Aye.
Commissioner Griggs,
Aye.
Commissioner Heller,
Aye.
Commissioner Levin,
Aye.
Commissioner Slater,
Nay.
Commissioner Vieira Brendel,
Aye.
and Commissioner Augustine is abstaining, and Commissioner Fott is absent.
Thank you, motion passes. Item 6, special orders of business, 6.1. Overview plan for local communication. First.
Good evening. My name is Julie Warnicki. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager with the Public Works Department. And we're here with me tonight is Eunice Kim, who you all know, the Long Range Planning Manager with Community Development. And we're here to give an overview of upcoming transportation and land use planning work.
Julie, can you minimize the things?
Okay, we'll get this figured out. So our presentation, we're gonna give a background of how we got to where we are today, and then what we're doing moving forward over the next 2, 3, 4 years. So as you all know, we've just recently completed the Salem planning project. It was accepted or adopted by City Council in middle of 2022. That was a multi-year effort that focused on updating the comprehensive policies plan as well as the zoning code and the zoning maps. In about the same time frame, the city was developing its first ever climate action plan that was accepted by City Council in 2022. Both of these planning efforts pointed to the community desire and need to update our transportation system plan. From the climate action plan side, about half of our greenhouse gas emissions in the Salem area come from transportation, so that was the driving force there. At the same time that all of this work was going on, the state was doing work of their own, and this was led by the Department of Land Conservation and Development. They initiated a climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking process in, it's initiated in 2022 and initiated in 2020 and adopted in 2022 with a focus on reducing emissions from greenhouse gas emissions from transportation and also promoting equity. This effort was done and initiated in response to Governor Brown's executive order directing state agencies to do everything within their control to address the climate crisis. Both myself and Lisa were on the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, so we've been tracking this effort closely. Those rules were finalized in middle of 2022 as well, and include many requirements directed towards cities and other jurisdictions located within Oregon's metropolitan areas, including Salem Kaiser. So bringing all these efforts together, we have created a project name of Salem in Motion, Connecting People and Places. This is going to be the project name that brings together all the elements where we're implementing these rules. Sorry. Watching Lisa, she's making faces. We have a web page. The address is up there on the web page. We will be updating that pretty frequently as things change. There's also a place on the web page for people to sign up for an email list where we'll provide updates. I'm going to hand this over to Eunice to do the next couple of sections.
Great. So one of the first tasks that we have to implement the new climate-friendly equitable communities rules are related to land use. One of our tasks is really to study and designate walkable mixed-use areas. These are areas that the state refers to as climate-friendly areas. We're referring to them as walkable mixed-use areas. These are essentially areas that are pedestrian-friendly. We have high-quality bicycle, pedestrian, and transit infrastructure, high-density housing, evasive uses. If you think about downtown Salem, right, high-density housing, there's commercial there, there's bike lanes, there's wider sidewalks, and transit center. So that's kind of your stereotypical great kind of walkable mixed-use areas. So the city's tasked at kind of studying potential locations for these. We're fortunate in Salem in that we went through the Salem process, and through that process, we rezoned over, I think, 1,500 acres to mixed use. We were developing the zoning code amendments to go with the Salem project while these state rules were happening. So we incorporated a lot of those rules, the density requirements, et cetera, into those zoning changes that we've already made. So again, we're really just building off the Salem project. We are doing a study currently though with the Council of Governments just to make sure we can meet the thresholds and all the standards that the state has met or has put in place. We have a webinar actually next week on Thursday to kind of give a high-level overview of these walkable mixed-use areas with staff from DLCD and Kaiser because they apply in both places, and we'll be answering questions from the public. Please join on Zoom. A big focus of our work in terms of the walkable mixed-use areas is really going to be focused on equity. We heard a lot through the Salem process that people were concerned about displacement, and we're actually going to take a step now to look at displacement potential from these mixed-use areas, have an equity roundtable that's comprised of representatives from our underrepresented communities, our communities of color, lower income, people with disabilities, seniors, youth, et cetera. And we're going to be launching those roundtables this spring. So we're gonna be looking at kind of housing, displacement, and what can we do to mitigate that displacement. Eventually, we will do some minor updates to our comprehensive plan zoning code to make sure, again, we meet all those rules, and be doing some transportation analysis to make sure our mixed-use areas are, or will be planned to have high-quality pedestrian, bicycle, and transportation. The other big lift that we're doing early in this process is looking at our parking requirements. The new state rules require cities like Salem to change the way we manage and regulate parking. The state lays out several options for how we can do that. Again, the whole goal being to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. We looked at those options and they're not all attainable given our existing capacity, resources, funding, staffing. So we are recommending one of the options. It was option 1, and that's to remove all minimum off-street parking requirements for all uses citywide. So developers can still provide parking, but the city would be essentially getting out of the practice of saying, based on your use or the number of units you're going to develop, you need a certain number of spaces. So those minimum requirements would just be no longer. It'd be really up to the developer, the market, and other considerations how much parking they wanted to provide. We held an open house at the library last month to answer questions from the community because we are going to be bringing this forward as a code amendment to the city council this spring.
So switching over to more directly transportation related things. The first phase of updating our transportation system plan is going to be developing a regional framework. The state refers to this as scenario planning. But since we've just done scenario planning with our Salem, we're really going to try to focus this scenario planning on transportation. And this regional plan will be used to show how we as a region, working with Kaiser and Marion County, can meet the greenhouse gas reduction targets that are established by the state. It will also establish regional performance measures and local performance measures that can be different for the different jurisdictions that we need to achieve through our transportation system plan and land use regulations. So this is that first phase. The time frame for this is starting sometime later in 2023 and working into 2024. We are we're the highest priority in the state for this work. Eugene, Springfield, I think, will be a little bit behind us, and then other jurisdictions behind that. So then the second phase is what's more traditionally thought of as our transportation master plan or transportation system plan. This is where we will have the policies, projects, priorities, and standards that guide city capital investments. They also guide development, code language, and things like that. One difference in this master plan that, different from the plan we've had for over 20 years is that it will have to be financially constrained according to state rules. And that doesn't mean we have to have the money in the bank. It means that we have to look out for the horizon of the planning period, which is usually, at least 20 years, probably a little bit longer, make informed assumptions about financial resources that might be expected, and then align our projects and priorities to fall within that dollar amount. Doing that, we have to show that we can achieve the performance benchmarks that were established in phase 1. We also have to include plans for the walkable mixed use areas and prioritize infrastructure in those areas. There's also a requirement to prioritize bicycle pedestrian infrastructure near high frequency transit routes, as well as in areas that have disproportionate populations of low income or other disadvantaged populations. Finally, there's a requirement that we conduct additional analysis for any project that is categorized as increasing capacity for motor vehicles. So if we're adding additional travel lanes on Commercial Street, for example, going south towards I-5, those sections, we would have to do additional analysis for any of those to continue to exist in our transportation system plan as they do today. So, that's it. There's a lot of work that's coming ahead. This is gonna be a multi-year process. What we're working on right now, in addition to the land use and the parking, is we are working with our regional partners to develop a work program that will establish the scope, our high-level budget estimate, and deadlines that we have to submit to the state by June 30th. We are hoping to submit it sooner. And then once the state approves that, that will then set into motion moving forward and getting started. The state Oregon Department of Transportation has committed to providing consultant support to work on some of these things, but I have a feeling it's going to be a pretty heavy lift to meet all these rules.
Great, thank you for the presentation. Commissioner Akers, do you have a question?
I do. You mentioned financial constraints. I understand that, you know, I was on the Public Utility Commission for 14 years, and we did a lot of these costs or integrated resource planning going out 20 years or even longer. What we found is the farther out you go, the more uncertainty you have. And so I'm wondering if that analysis might include some different scenarios. If there'd be any scenario analysis that would say, well, under these conditions, we expect the financial constraints to be this level, which would allow us to do this. Under another scenario, we'd have different options. You expect to be able to do something like that?
Yes, I assume that we'll be able to do sort of like a low, medium, high. Not 100% sure if the state will be okay with us, you know, putting in projects to the high amount, or if they're going to want us to go to the median. It is a list that would also be able to change over time. We do currently have a financially constrained project list at our regional level, working with the Federal Metropolitan Planning Organization. So we have a model for that. However, we've never done it at the local level, and I think that at the local level, similar to some of the things you guys have been talking about, where there's a lot of equity considerations, you know, well, what about my neighborhood? That's going to be a factor.
Additional question? We reviewed the transportation system plan. That was does it require a certain period of time? 5 years? Or is it optional? Anyway, the question is, how often would we do this? Is there an expectation of reviewing it, revising it in a period of time, 5 years or so? Or are we just doing this as a one-time exercise?
Well, I'm thinking that the heavy lift part will only come around every decade or so, but there will definitely be interim reviews. When we developed the city's first transportation system plan was in the mid to late 90s. It was adopted in 1998. We have reviewed it. We've updated sections of it almost every other year, about every, but with different focuses. And so this is the first time since 1998 that we are going to be doing a really comprehensive review of it. So I anticipate sort of a similar trajectory going forward.
Commissioner Slater.
I have several questions. So other than Ruben's, the first question is the capital improvement. The transportation system plan, will that drive the capital improvement plan budget? What is the relationship between them?
Well, the transportation system plan identifies the needs and then the projects to address those needs at a high level. The capital improvement plan looks to the master plan to take projects to then fund and deliver. So in that sense, the transportation system plan is driving that set of project needs. Anything that you have in the capital improvement plan needs to be consistent with the transportation system plan. Now, some things like, installing a sidewalk section on this particular Rubens, okay, may not be called out as a line item project, but it is consistent with the transportation system plan. So in terms of finances, you know, like, will the transportation system plan say, capital improvement plan, you have $20 million? No, those decisions are usually made by the funding, so, you know, the city has revenue and then they allocate it, so TSDC revenue. We will make assumptions in the transportation system plan that say, we expect to have, you know, $2 million a year from this particular funding source or whatever.
I have a couple more questions, but I can take yours.
Here's another.
Is the overall goal, or one goal of the TSP to reduce the amount of vehicle miles driven in the city of Salem? Or to constrain or reduce the growth? What's the relationship there?
The state rules are going to require our transportation system plan to meet certain performance metrics, including looking at things like vehicle miles traveled per capita. Exactly what that ends up looking like is still, will still be developed. We don't really have great modeling tools for some of this, but
I guess my overall question is, are we expecting that at the end of the day, we're gonna have a transportation system that's going to facilitate car transit? It's going to keep it the way it is, or is it actually gonna reduce or discourage car transit? Or we don't know.
as I say, at the moment, we don't really know. We will be setting the goals of the policies. We have state rules to meet that are focused on enhancing transportation by means other than people driving. But there also are requirements that we provide transportation for people who are driving. So, those relative priorities are gonna have to come out, and be defined through the process. Do you wanna have anything?
I'm just gonna say that through the regional scenario planning, the phase 1 of the TSD, where we set those local measures, we do have to meet the GHG reduction targets for transportation that the state has set, so we will have to be aiming down.
One or two more questions. One of my big concerns is as we move to mixed use and increased residential density, and we're looking for more walking and biking and less individual car driving, that we don't really have a street structure, especially our major corridors, I think Lancaster, commercial, that facilitate walking or biking. They're not pleasant places for people to walk. Sometimes they're dangerous places for people to walk. It's not the kind of place where you want to wake up on your 3rd floor apartment, open your window and look out at Lancaster, it looks down and say, well, I'm really looking to bike to work today. So, I think that's a very serious problem, and what's going to happen if we don't address the way that our major streets look is we're going to build for density and no one's going to get out their car because the idea of walking, biking is so unpleasant. So we're going to get the worst of both worlds. We're not going to get the benefit of a walkable neighborhood because we're not investing, we don't have the resources. So to what extent are we looking in the transportation plan over the actual design of the streets and how we induce people to want to be out on our public streets?
I think that's a big part of it. It is looking at what those designs are, what is going to draw people to want to walk and bike, but part of that's going to be what can we afford, because we do have that financial constraint. So it's going to be an interesting, dialogue and trade-offs.
And I think a part of the discussion of our Salem was that, how do we build those beautiful walkable, and so we make some changes to the
And I have just one last question. Are we anticipating designing or planning out a car charging network as part of the TSP?
I would expect that the issue about, car charging, electrification will come up, and I'm guessing that there will be policy language in the TSP. I don't think that the TSP itself is the mechanism for designing a car charging network. I think that would have to be done separately, and whether that's a city role or some other organization role, I don't know, but I don't see that being within the scope of the TSP itself.
So the TSP, when it's done and we look at a map, we won't see charging stations or anything like that stuff. Okay.
I don't envision that, given the the TSP tends to be at a higher level, and so there will likely need to be some refinement planning, because planning never stops. That, you know, says, hey, maybe this area is significantly undercharged, you know, or, you know, should be a priority. Or maybe we'll have policy statements that say on, you know, I-5 access points, or whatever.
I think Eunice wants to add on.
I was gonna add that the code amendment that we passed in December, that was implementing part of these new state rules, was a requirement that multifamily and mixed use with more than 5 units, right, has to put in the capacity, the EV capacity for at least 40% of the spaces, so there'll be some piece, at least capacity that's gonna be built in the project development.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is awesome. I'm so excited. The transportation system plan is just such an incredible, like, an important document. And I think it links back to Commissioner Slater, to our prior conversation too, when we were discussing, you know, why transportation mitigation measures are exempted from the SDC caps, because any development, you know, when you go to put in a subdivision or a commercial residential development, that whatever's shown in the TSP is what you're on the hook for, right? And that's why that's so important, right? And so if the TSP shows a street going through your site, or if it shows, like, you know, a 4-lane parkway with bike lanes and landscaping strips, that's what, when you go to develop that property, and obviously there's so much nuance to that, but like, that's a document that guides what gets built, right? And so I think it's just really exciting process, and I know and everyone's just going to be fantastic about. As far as the planning commission, what is our, like, roles going to be in sort of as we walk through this process and start to develop it? What are our touch points going to be on, you know, ready and put on it?
Well, on the transportation system planning part of it, I'm sure that we are going to have some sort of steering committee, and we will likely look to, I would assume we would look to planning commission. I know when we did our big update of our bicycle and pedestrian plans back in 2010 to 2012, we had a representative from planning commission on that steering committee, so I anticipate that. I don't know on the walkable mixed use areas, that's much more focused at this point, because it's building off of our Salem work that's already been done. So I don't see something starting up immediately. We have to really, this regional scenario planning process is going to be that first step, and I don't yet know the involvement structure for that. But yes, we will keep you guys involved.
I anticipate that we'll be invited back here to give updates and joint work sessions with the council, similar to what we did with our state.
Did you have another question, Commissioner Cole?
No, I did want to say that I was one the last in 1998, so I think it's a timely and
Maybe other questions or comments for staff on this? Thank you for your time. That was a great overview. Commissioner Slater, are you saying you want to talk again?
Okay. Thank you. We'll move on to item 7.1.
That's right, so we put the annual report in your packet, and I don't know if you tuned into council last night, but your presidents sent your report to the council and did a great job. I'll send you the link tomorrow and tell you the minutes, so if you just want to jump to it and watch the presentation.
We were compared to being half a sexy city council. I was sort of. Yes.
But maybe you should talk about what you highlighted in the questions you got.
I highlighted the signed code amendment. I highlighted, as far as one of the most difficult cases that we had that were quasi-judicial before us, was the Cooper property, and how the applicant wanted the mixed use 3, staff recommended CO, and how the back and forth. Neighborhood Association was very involved, and there was a compromise reached where we limited, we did offer them the MU3, but limited them to 3 private use in their building footprint greater than 7 housing. And talked about the future work coming up with hopefully that process. Just highlight, it was great. There were no unusual questions.
No, yeah, I remember Counselor Stapleton said she was really excited about the sign code coming up.
I gave the example of that with flutter flags, what are we trying to limit, because there's no limit.
And yeah, I thought it went really well. And the new rules, which Commissioner Griggs found out tonight, unfortunately, is that she has to go later in the agenda. She can't see at the beginning.
Heads up to whoever's in the seat in January. We were at the beginning of the agenda, now you get to wait.
Almost to the end, yeah, special orders of business, but they do set aside time, so if ever you want to do a full presentation in PowerPoint, you would have that opportunity now limited to the 3 minutes, so.
Bye, Julie, thank you, Ms.
So that's all, we just wanted to highlight the annual report. Any questions?
Commissioner Slater.
Ms. Anderson, can you tell us anything about the preliminary inventory?
I can a little bit. So, actually I looked it up, it was 2 years ago. We had the subdivision in West Salem with the creek, or didn't have the creek, or the riparian.
We talked about that last night too.
Yeah, and so the planning commission offered a letter to the council asking them to update full 5 and relook at our maps for riparian. And the council agreed to that. They agreed that it was a follow-up project from our Salem, and it was put into Public Works budget, Mr. Chandler's group over there, and staff in Public Works are the lead. I see Robert's going toward his mic. I had a meeting with the staff last week, but we will let Robert speak about where they're at.
That is true. Public Works has the lead by division, natural resources planning is working on it. It's complicated in its couple-year process. Broadly is inventory, looking at fish habitat, potential fish habitat, looking at opportunities for mitigation. There's 2 different ways to set the setbacks, different options. The end product would be fascinating, but is underway.
I think the intent would be potentially to have a steering committee for that project as well. And we are recommending that planning commissioners be seated on the committee. So hopefully that would be something that commissioners who's interested in could be part of that project when Public Works gets closer to that point.
Okay. Other questions on the annual report, we'll move to public comment. You get one more chance to talk.
Just generally non-agenda.
Sure. Awesome. Okay, come to the podium and just state your word, please, if you would mind, if you know it, or your address, or something.
Just a single button on here.
I've never read.
Incredible. My name is Chris Smith. I live in Morningside. I am the lead district to Salem. After about a decade of being out of Oregon, I just moved back here in September. And I used to actually live in Almsville. Back when, there was about 2 people in Almsville. So, but when I lived in Almsville, I felt very isolated, right? Because there's not really anything to go to, right? When I was a kid, there's no sidewalks where I lived, and there was nowhere interesting to go. And I moved back here. I was like, I'm gonna move to the city. It's gonna be awesome. It felt the same. It felt very isolated, and that was incredibly frustrating to me. I was expecting that I could just walk somewhere interesting. Turns out orange stores don't really exist anymore, right? There's no third place anymore in Salem. That really sucks. That really bums me out. And so I think I got frustrated enough that I decided that my generation needs to start taking more presence in these meetings to kind of take charge of our future. Thank you. So one thing that I really wanted to express is that this is purely anecdotal, but just so you can kind of get in touch with what my generation is feeling, is that generally we want to live in neighborhoods that are tax positive and financially solid, right? And also organically developed. We don't want things that are built to a finished state that are encased in amber, right? We don't want to live in single family housing that is just going to be single family housing forever until the entire thing's torn down, right? We want to live in places with duplexes and quadplexes and interesting mixed use developments and places that develop over time.
that don't have to be maintained in these giant improvement projects, but instead can be broken up into smaller pieces over time. And that leads to places like, you know, in the UK where they have hubs, right, that are built over time, right? We can have third places in your neighborhoods, which I think is especially appropriate now that we have work from home. We need to start bringing economy, local economy into the neighborhoods. It's not enough to have commercial districts and zones. We need to start bringing these places into the neighborhoods, so we have places to go, interesting places to be, and also so we can meet our carbon greenhouse guidelines and credits.
It's awesome. You mentioned that, bringing things to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
The neighborhood hubs are one of the new elements of our Salem plan, which is just exactly what we're trying to target with that. You know, go to a local coffee shop or go, you know, to a local restaurant that's in your neighborhood.
I'm excited to see how y'all are gonna implement that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, so we recommend that you get involved with the neighborhood association, because all of these folks around the table tell you, when they come in front of us in planning commission, they carry quite a bit of weight and the decisions that we make, so I take them through.
Yeah, I did just go to the Morningside Neighborhood Association meeting. Unfortunately, my counselor is not there. Unfortunately, because he's family issues. I'm wishing the best to him and his family.
Counselor Phillips, yeah.
Yeah, but I did get a chance to meet the chairman of the Morningside.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, lovely. So, yeah, I look forward to coming to a lot of these meetings and
We're going to have
comment. Thank you.
any questions from the commissioners? Thank you for taking the time out. Wait through that whole meeting. Oh, you have a question? Can you read this?
When you say your generation, which generation are you?
Oh, I was born in '97, so I'm kind of just Gen Z,
So you were born when the transportation plan was previously done.
Yes.
That's hilarious. Okay, planning administrator report, do you have anything for us?
Just the last night at council, short-term rentals were a big topic on the agenda. And I guess you left right after yours, so it started right after yours. And there was a council motion from Councilman Shioka to have staff relook at how we allow short-term rentals. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's what we call like an Airbnb type use. Short-term rental is when the entire house, the only purpose is for like a vacation rental. It's not like somebody lives there and then they rent out a room. We have a few people that have gone through the process of doing that. We have more people that do accessory short-term rentals, so it's their house, they live there, they rent out a room while they're there, or under the rules, they can rent out the entire house for up to 95 days out of the year, so like they can go on vacation and rent the house out. Majority of all people doing it in the city don't actually get the license or come through and follow the rules. And Airbnb won't share their addresses with us, so it's very difficult for us to track them down. There was a approval for one that is a full-time rental on Mission Street, Mission and Church, in the Scan neighborhood in the historic district. And
Right across from the playground by the old high school.
exactly, and the neighbors were very happy with it. So it was on the council agenda last night, did not get called up for review, so it is a final approval. But Councilman Shugo made a motion asking staff to research what other cities allow, look at, you know, how's it affecting your housing stock, is there crime associated with it? There was a timely article in the paper yesterday about rental and crime. You didn't see if you saw that, you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, staff will be working on that and bringing some information back to the council for them to consider if they want to change the rules. Seems like maybe some of them want to stop allowing the full kind of investment property rental that way, and then just allow homeowners or to do it on a more limited basis. But then some of them spoke about property rights or that it's good for tourism to have these, and so it'll be interesting. We've only allowed them for 6 years. So in 2017, we had numerous hearings and work sessions when we adopted them at the time. Mayor Bennett was really in support of the statewide Airbnb. They're like, that we should allow them to say, and the eclipse was going to happen and was coming up, and it was like, where's everyone going to stay? Get as many people as we thought, because they will with the eclipse, but Right now, we generally have about 30 people that get a license per year to do it, to go on Airbnb, you can see a few hundred, you know, people advertising, kind of a cap there. So Airbnb does collect our transit occupancy tax on anybody that uses our platform, and they send us the check. So we do get the money on that platform, not on other platforms. So we'll be working on that and bring some information back, but it's been a hot topic all around City Hall, with all the councilors and all the emails in the last few days. So just wanted to let you know about that. The sign code, I think we're gonna try to bring it back, or actually have the public hearing on the sign code dates in April. That's the date we're shooting for. We've just been so many staff turnovers and vacancies that we've had a really hard time having to prioritize that, but it's gonna be able to do it. So we're setting a date in April. I know there was a list of things in the work session that you asked us to look at and bring more information back on, so we're working on that. And some counselors have asked us to think about some things as well that we haven't maybe addressed in our first draft, but so that's coming up.
February 20th.
We do, we have a new comp plan zone change scheduled that we'll be presenting, and then I think Aaron will have a resolution to actually initiate the code amendment for the sign code on that night, so then we can send those to the state and start notifying people.
Questions of Lisa for the report?
Where are we at with the tree updates?
The street code?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Laurel's looking too. So maybe I'll let Laurel give it a few.
We took the tree code amendment to scrap for an initial review, and then we're kind of still in this staff review of the amendments role, and we're considering kind of changing the way we're incorporating the land use process specifically into more of the planning code rather than where it's in 86, and so that's kind of what we're looking at now. I anticipate that will go back to scrap before it goes to city council, but I don't have dates setting yet for that.
I had a question too from council last night. The mayor mentioned that Councilor Barney is going to be the liaison to SPRAP, Parks and Rec Advisory Board. And it sounds like that he's going to be appointing some to different boards and commissions. Are we getting one?
I haven't heard, so I heard that she was appointed for liaison. I thought, oh, that's interesting, and the parks staff were like, yeah, we have a liaison now. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I have not heard that we would be getting one. It might be a little different planning commission because of the land use cases, right? And the ex parte, although they could, you know, counselors could be at home watching this right now if they have nothing better to do, and that would be okay because if they do review the case, then the hearing would be part of the record. But I'm not sure that planning commission. I do know that the mayor is interested in revamping boards and commissions generally, looking at what their roles are. We have the right boards and commissions. Maybe we have too many. Maybe I know we have some that feel like they don't really have like the purpose that they were created for. Like different roles, things that the council are doing be given to boards and commissions to kind of lighten their load. He's mentioned that that's a goal of his to start this year. So there may be things that come your way. If you assign a counselor or more work or more areas to cover. So
Because I think we have capacity to do more. Commissioner, this now we're moving on to. Did you have a question?
Did you want to say anything about the reorganization?
2 deputies?
Sure. There's so many changes. It's hard to.
Yeah, I don't think we've been briefed on any.
Yeah, so we have new city manager, Keith, he started last fall. So he's made some organizational changes. Specifically, the city's kind of gone back and forth from having a deputy city manager and not, and so most recently we have not. And he's decided that based on the size of our city, that he really needs 2 deputy city managers to help him run the city. And so he appointed Krishna Nambori, who could most recently be IT and HR department head, as his deputy city manager. And she's in charge of all the internal kind of city operations, so IT, HR, fleet, facilities, all those people. And then he's recruiting for another deputy city manager. As part of that, he's creating basically a new department that the new city deputy city manager would run for, I call them fun things, but I call them like community services, community oriented things, the library, Center 50 Plus, parks, rec, that kind of and fun things, happy things, which actually used to be a department before the recession, and the entire department was a happy department.
Happy department.
Yeah, so they.
There's your problem.
Yeah. So that recruitment is underway, sometime this spring or summer, that position will be filled. To fund that position, Norman Wright, who was our director of community development, left. And so to fund that position, they took his position and turned it into that new position. And so they combine community development with urban development. Urban development has a director, Kristen Rutherford, so she's now our director. We don't have a department name because we decided it wasn't going to be like CUD or CRUD or something like that. So you'll hear various people say that they're an ED or they're a CD, I think she says she's the community development and urban development director, which is a mouthful at the moment. So
I think there's a flow chart. I think there's a org chart.
We need one because
There's have one.
yeah, it's still,
Or is it still not there?
there's still things are moving around, and it still hasn't been decided all the people that are moving into the department, programs have been moving, but the people, so like for people that are trying to move out, what administrative staff are moving, what management and that kind of stuff, so there's, and then there's just kind of the, where people sit is also very jumbled right now, because Public Works is building a building, they're almost done, urban development's downtown, but obviously, Kristen's in charge of us and we're up here. She's also in charge of the housing authority, which has their own building. This building's going to be remodeled, right, with the bond money, so that it's.
Is that why they took old mayor's photos down?
I don't know why.
So sad.
So, there's just a lot of change, so we just say, just roll with it. That's what we're trying to do. We're just going to do us, do our work and roll with it.
Roll with it.
Sure.
Other questions for Lisa? And we'll move on to comments for the good of the order, Commissioner Goble.
I do have a comment for the good of the order, and I was hoping to announce this a couple months ago, but we have not on a meeting in a while, but I am expecting. I will not be at planning commission meetings and probably potentially not the name, you know, who's kind of right.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Any other comments for the Commissioner? Yes.
It's not a comment, it's a notice. I'm not sure if everybody knows, but the 2023 Salem State of the City event. Chris Hoy giving the State of the City speech, which he is calling a new beginning, is on Wednesday, March 22nd, from 11 a.m. lunch at 11:30. Presentation begins at noon. It's at the Salem Convention Center. There's a link at the city of Salem's site for the event, and registration form. I think lunches are $30 or something, but you don't have to be. You don't have to buy lunch to be there.
But if you don't buy lunch, you sit in the bathroom.
You can sit in the bathroom. The event is co-sponsored by the Rotary Club, the Salem City Club, and the Chamber of Commerce. This year, the Chamber of Commerce has the lead, but I just thought I'd make
That's a good
announcement. People didn't already know about the State of the City.
Thank you.
So I have one, if I could.
You bet.
So in December, I had an opportunity to participate in a workshop that was sponsored by the Department of U.S. Energy and the landscape program at the University of Oregon. And the issue there was the realization that as we move from carbon-based fuels to renewable fuels, the actual physical footprint that is going to be required in order to meet our energy needs is going to be significantly larger than what it currently is. And so the U.S. Department of Energy is really working with partners to try and expand the placement of renewable energy infrastructure in urban areas. And so the project that I participated in was bringing designers, planners, and other people together to think about, in these 4 kind of urban type schools, et cetera, how can we integrate renewable energy into those? So it's kind of a brainstorming workshop. What I left with was the recognition that in order to meet our renewable energy goals, we're going to have to really maximize the use of land efficiency here in our urban environment. So that in Salem, as we look about and see these huge asphalt parking lots, as we look at roofs and in warehouses and all these other structures, we really need to be looking at those as potential renewable energy opportunities, and to think more about that. So that's an issue I hope to bring back here soon, because I think that it fits well within the purview of the planning department, the planning commission, and looking at advising the city council on how we manage growth. So I just wanted to find that for people.
Thanks for sharing that article. Yeah.
Michael, in this discussion, was there anything about design or planning requirements related to solar energy in relation to developments or buildings, actually, any implementation of some requirements that there be a certain orientation, or that there be some sort of accommodation for the ability to install solar?
Yeah, I'm looking into this, and of course Lisa, I'm sure, has some answers as well. I've been involved in a couple small solar projects, one at Temple Shalom, one in my own house. We just installed solar. We were able to install it in an east-facing direction, which was surprising to me. And actually, because of our sunny days, we've actually produced more power than we used at my house in an east-facing direction, which is kind of exciting. At least we were, because we paid a lot for it. One issue that came up that I learned, and I think this is one of the reasons I'd like to explore it more, is that we had to have about maybe $2,000 worth of structural work done in order to manage the wind loads of those on the roof. And the installer that we use said they're the only company they know of that will take a client that needs to have structural work done on their roof, because there's such demand that they can just go to the easier houses. My house is a 1955 ranch. And there's a lot of housing stock that is that age and older. And so if that's the criteria of what's happening in the marketplace, we're gonna have a real tough time meeting some of our, the solar demands and requirements. So that was just one thing that I experienced. I know, and maybe Lisa wants to correct me, but I don't think the city has done any sort of comprehensive review of its own policies in terms of what could facilitate or what is inhibiting solar. The company that installed mine said, oh, it's really too bad we have these wind requirements. We never had wind events. Well, that's obviously not true. But it's probably worth looking into. And I think that's one of the things that we as a commission can do.
I just add that I support that. I thought early on that one of the things that we might look at was whether or not there should be any requirements or any provisions in our codes in relation to buildings, both residential and commercial, that would facilitate or help facilitate. It used to be that I would see houses, huge developments, which if you looked at them, they were all oriented east to west because you looked at the sunset and sunrise. But for the position of our sun, it wasn't very good for solar. But there is new technology, I believe, that where your solar panels can move, et cetera. But I support kind of going in that direction as something to at some point consider, see what the impact, whether we are facilitating, if there's a way to facilitate, or whether there's something that's inhibiting new construction, that's inhibiting the opportunities for solar. Requiring solar. Anyway, I just wanted to support what Michael's.
Yeah, good comments, good discussion. Any other comments on the good of the order? If not, we're adjourned.
Yeah, I'm on the cusp. I'm on the cusp, yeah. So either way. Yeah.
I enjoyed being there. Yeah. Yeah. I get it. Well, and I don't, yeah. I don't go out there, so.
It's correctly.